most cruel moments on paternity court.
You are not the father.
Now don't look at me. Ask her who your daddy really is.
It don't have to be over
She's
with
over
if
with
you're
now.
my daughter. We can build from now forward. We can't ever get back to past.
In this one episode, there's a lot of beef between a man and his daughter. You know what's cruel? When a grown daughter comes to court doubting that her father isn't her biological father. This is the case of Mr. Langston and Miss Garnett. And boy, keep your tissues prepared, because you're about to have your heart crushed.
After visiting him in 2015, he wasn't responding.
Your mother blanked me about your birth father being me. She was missing around when you were born. I don't want to keep causing you pain, but I have mixed feelings about it. Talk to your mother and find out the truth.
So, it turns out it took years for Miss Garnett to develop a working relationship with her father, who she assumed was Mr. Langston. For a while, the two kept talking to each other. And what's more, she found him at a funeral and always wanted to keep a steady connection going. But then one day, things changed for the worse.
Miss Garnett, you grew up as a daddy's girl. You say he's your best friend.
He's always been my dad. 2 years ago, when I was at the funeral with him, he had brought up for the very first time that he thought I may not have been his daughter, which blew my mind.
It's a pretty hurtful moment for Miss Garnett when Mr. Langston tells the entire court that he always doubted her being his daughter, right from the moment when she was born. The look in Miss Garnett's eyes are pretty heartbreaking in that moment, because she always thought she had a great relationship with her dad, and he just had trauma dumped on her out of nowhere.
I pressured her. Did you do anything with him? She kept saying no. Then she came around. I gave him some because he kept knocking on the door bag. So I finally gave in and gave him some.
Mr. Langston talks about catching his wife doing it with someone else, but when Judge Lauren asks her if that's true, she completely denies it. So, who's really telling the truth here? And when she got pregnant with Miss Garnett, she swears that Mr. Langston was the only man she'd been seeing, which leaves no room for doubt.
When the baby was born, did Mr. Langston participate in the birth?
Not at all. He was just not that type of person.
Did he sign the birth certificate?
No.
I paid child support, not only 18 years, I paid it 20 years.
But when
they
did you
started
start?
sending me checks back for overpayment, $1,700, $800.
Miss Garnett's mother even went and got a DNA test done all by herself, but Mr. Langston never showed up. It was like he didn't even want Miss Garnett in his life. He kept yammering about paying child support, but always emotionally distanced himself from his daughter's life. And now, she's all grown up, wondering who her real dad is.
I felt like he was taking my identity away from me because I've always known I was a Langston.
Okay.
I have so much about my father. When he came back into my life, it was like a piece of the puzzle was missing. Not only the personality, there's just so many other things. I don't think we would have been able to do that.
And because of all the confusion, Miss Garnett decided to post something about trying to find her father on Facebook. She wanted to see if she had any resemblance to Mr. Langston and his family relatives, so she dug into the family history and tried to do some soul searching so she could find some peace.
This picture, and it reminded me of this picture of my grandfather. And I noticed some similarities in our faces. I posted it to Facebook to get some support.
Moving on, Mr. Langston makes all these false claims about never wanting to hurt Miss Garnett, and that if she's really his daughter, he'll come through and be the father she's always wanted in her life. He's cracking jokes to lighten the mood and keeps saying he doesn't trust himself. But the only way to resolve this now is to reveal the results of the test.
You are not the father.
Now don't look at me. Ask her who your daddy really is.
There are a lot of stories out there that just crush your heart, but this one's sure to break it into many pieces. Mr. Johnson and Miss Carr have been fighting over the paternity of their daughter for 18 years now, and it's taking a toll on the teenager. So, there's only one way to find an answer to all that drama.
Your Honor, Mr. Johnson has always acknowledged my daughter.
Your Honor, that's incorrect. When her daughter was first born, her father came to my house and said that they had a DNA test with another man. I was not the father. He was the father.
Now, this is where things take a weird turn. According to Mr. Johnson, he's had sex with Miss Carr only once, whereas on the other hand, Miss Carr confesses they did it more than once. Who should be believed here? Is either of them telling the truth? The first time Miss Carr found out she was pregnant, she immediately told Mr. Johnson. And the way he reacted.
This is something I cannot forget. I told my family member after I got off the phone with Miss Carr, I could have a baby on the way.
Nobody else in the family knew about him being a possibility until I had her on the delivery table. I had a boyfriend at the time. My boyfriend
was the father
the
of
whole
the child.
time.
All right.
These two keep fighting, but they don't realize how it's affecting their 18-year-old daughter. At the time, Miss Carr also had a boyfriend, and Mr. Johnson was suspicious that the girl never really belonged to him. And then, a long time ago, Mr. Johnson runs into the girl at a grocery store.
3 to 4 years later, I move in with a family member that they are close to. Miss May is constantly interacting with these family members. She comes to the family member's house. This is not my daughter. I said I need a DNA test. Even without the DNA test, I started accepting Miss May as my child.
According to Mr. Johnson, he did as much as he could to become involved in the girl's life. He even arranged for all birthday parties, and he did everything that he could as a father. But all this time, he never got a DNA test done, so there wasn't any true confirmation about who was the poor girl's actual father. On top of that, Miss Carr felt like he never communicated things with her.
My 10th birthday, he threw me a party at the water park. I remember that. And summer after 5th grade, I remember that day because he made me stay in the house.
When's the last time you saw Mr. Johnson?
Last time I saw Mr. Johnson was 2010.
They bring the 18-year-old into the court. Miss May sits next to the judge and shares how she doesn't have a lot of memories with Mr. Johnson, and that she had to grow up with a pretty confusing atmosphere at home. After all this trouble, there's only one way to find the answers and stop all the heartbreak.
It has been determined by this court. Mr. Johnson, you are her father.
It's okay. It's okay.
Miss Cherpez is here in court to tell the story of how Mr. McQueen abandoned his little daughter and ran away to another state. Since then, he's failed to step up to his responsibilities as the father of the cute girl and keeps denying that the baby is his. Will baby Araya grow up with or without a father?
You very angry about that?
Yes.
Tell the court.
It's hard because I didn't ever see it like this.
How did you see it?
Like he had promised.
And how was that?
I had moved out to go live with him, and we had actually planned on having her. Everything went downhill from there.
Mr. McQueen claims he's done plenty of things for his daughter, but as it turns out, he's only bought diapers and wipes for her. And you all know that fathers are supposed to do a lot more than that. On top of that, he says he doubts that Araya is his because Miss Cherpez has a lot of affairs with other men.
I have doubts because I didn't have her full attention, more interested in getting other men's attention than mine.
So tell me, what was the nature of your relationship? Were you committed? Were you boyfriend and girlfriend?
Yes, we were committed, yes.
This next revelation will put a bullet in your heart. While Miss Cherpez had been planning on building a future with Mr. McQueen, guess what he'd been doing? He was busy sleeping around. He had the audacity to say Miss Cherpez was not faithful to him when it was him who had been going behind her back all this time. And Miss Cherpez caught him in time.
And so you caught him cheating on you?
Yep.
And how did this lead to the paternity question?
It's because he doesn't trust himself, so he thought it was all right, so he assumes I thought it was okay to be cheating on him.
Because he was out there doing the wrong thing. He thinks you were as well, but you were not.
No.
The first time she catches him cheating, it was absolutely devastating. But Miss Cherpez couldn't do much about it because 3-year-old Araya was with her and she didn't want to taint her little girl's world with adult problems. On top of that, he accuses Miss Cherpez of cheating on him. But the real question is, does he have proof?
She did tell me she was going to her father's to do laundry. I actually found out that she went to another man's house and spent the night.
Is that true, Miss Cherpez?
Yes, because he had brought a woman to our house. So to kind of avoid the fighting, I had left, yes.
Then Miss Cherpez has her mother standing with her. She interjects and talks about how, when Mr. McQueen should be the one focusing on Araya's responsibilities, they're the ones actually looking after the baby. The worst part is that they planned to have Araya, and now he's just breaking her heart.
Texting other men. She was going to see other men. She was using me.
Using you for what?
Using me for a place. I
didn't need to live with you. I was living with my dad.
Yeah, and I took you out of there so you didn't have to put up with the bad situation.
Mr. McQueen levels another accusation at Miss Cherpez. This time, he claims that she had been sleeping with her ex-boyfriend, and the worst thing he says is that she was taking money from him. It's so obvious this man has no respect for the woman he got pregnant with. But the least he can do is respect the mother of his daughter.
Because this court has identified a man named Glenn Gerber.
This is also one
who Miss Chirpez was intimate with.
That would be the man she stayed the night with. That was
Is
the man
that true,
she
Miss
told.
Chirpez?
Yes.
So you told him you were at your father's house, but really you had spent the night with another man.
Yep.
The thing that makes all of this even more difficult for Miss Chirpez is that Araya isn't her first child. She's already handling 2 kids and was happily living in her own home raising them until Mr. McQueen came into the picture. And now, there's only one way of settling this matter.
Pertaining to whether Mr. Gerber or Mr. McQueen is the father of 8-month-old Araya, the biological father is Mr. McQueen. See?
Miss Herman and Mr. Houston have one hell of a matter to settle in paternity court, and the cruelty in this one is just going to knock you off your seat. Miss Herman's come to pledge her case with Judge Lauren. It turns out Mr. Houston had a secret affair with Miss Herman behind his wife's back and refuses to acknowledge that he's Corey's father.
Mr. Houston was living a double life.
He was a cheater. He was also a womanizer. After we had sex, not too long after, I found out he had a wife and children.
How did you find that out?
I like to call this the investigate stage. When my woman intuition hits, that's what I do. I investigate.
So in the beginning, things were all good and sweet. But then, after doing the deed one too many times with each other, Mr. Houston got Miss Herman pregnant. At first, he was all gentlemanly and consoling, full of promises about being there for her every step of the way. But then, one day...
So you go on Facebook and you see this picture of Mr. Houston and he has a wedding ring on his hand. And then what do?
And then I call him.
You never told her you were married, Mr. Houston?
Never has he ever even brought up the fact that he had children.
I met her as a gentleman. Before anything, before my father, before my dad, before my liar, before my cheater, I'm a man first.
Damn, poor Miss Herman had no idea Mr. Houston had been hiding a whole family from her. That must have felt like one strong stab in the back. Miss Herman had to do her own investigation to find all the juicy details through Facebook. And the worst part, he already had 5 kids.
Before I met her, it wasn't her business. You see what I'm saying? I was more curious about getting to know who she was.
So your marriage and your kids and your wife were all extra things.
I wasn't trying to go in a direction of being with her or...
But you didn't use protection when you were sleeping with her.
This man has way too much audacity. He didn't use protection, and he even kept his family life hidden like a secret. And when Miss Herman gets pregnant, he just shows up for 2 doctor's appointments and decides to say goodbye to the rest. What an irresponsible man. But wait, hear the cruelest thing about this case.
I was up, went to the bathroom, I called Carice and I asked her, what you doing? She answered the phone at 2 a.m. I wound up leaving, going over there in my car, I went to her house.
Mr. Houston, did your wife have any idea you were leaving the house at 2 in the morning and sleeping with another woman?
The thing is this, we were already on the verge of going through a divorce.
But the best part plays out when Mr. Houston's wife joins the scene. After all, it's 2 women he's been making a fool of in this entire case of events. His wife had no idea what was going on, just like Miss Herman didn't know the man had been keeping a family on the side. So, when things are revealed, it all goes south.
And I'm like, so somebody is pregnant by you? Eventually, I end up calling the number and I talked to her. Was she really pregnant by him? Was she sure like it was his baby, You're pregnant, I'm pregnant too. So how does that work?
Then Mr. Houston dares to say he didn't have a great father himself, so that's why he wants to have as many kids as possible. But Judge Lauren doesn't let that slide. She tells him straight to his face that he's not the superhero that he thinks he is. And then all hell breaks loose again when Miss Herman reveals how Mr. Houston tricked her.
Saying they're allergic to latex, but not allergic to sex.
This woman tried trapping me.
I mean, it's like
sex at all. You're right.
If you allergic to latex, then you don't need to be having no sex.
When he first brought out the condom, I said, is it a no latex condom? He told me, no, it's latex. I said, I can't use that. I said, we better off not. No, never mind. I'll just do it anyway. But it wasn't your intent to get me pregnant.
Not only does Mr. Houston keep disrespecting his wife, he also keeps throwing insults at Miss Herman. The judge has had enough of him. He calls women chicken, and that throws the entire court into a moment of silence. Is this man even man enough to become a father? Should poor Corey live a life with a man like him?
Mr. Houston, you are not the father.
Yes!
I asked you,
Came to the
was
bed.
there any other man? The truth is you were already pregnant. Do you know who your child's father is?
Yeah.